Hey everybody, this is John for Pioneer Nexus MTG coming at you with another deck overview. This time someone requested 5-color Enigmatic Incarnation Fires. As a friendly reminder, if you do like these informative deck overviews, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving us a thumbs up, leaving a constructive comment down below. And we also have a poll going on right now about whether you would like to see gameplay possibly return to the channel as well. Possibly thinking about Boros Heroic or Lotus Field combo, as they're both fairly easy to obtain decks. So that said, let's get into this deck overview. 5-color Enigmatic Fires is a card based around the card's Enigmatic Incarnation, which allows you to sacrifice another enchantment. If you do, search your library for a creature card with mana value 1 or greater, or 1 equal to 1 plus the sacrificed enchantment's mana value. Put that card on the battlefield and then shuffle. And also powering out with Fires of Invention, being able to play about 2 spells per turn without using your mana, and then using your mana for other things, such as cycling some Triomes or buying your Yorions, etc. Beyond that, you're playing a bunch of cheap enchantments, most notably things like Fable the Mirror Breaker, which is just kind of an mid-range all-star and everything that's in. Chain of the Rocks to deal with any problematic creatures your opponent's doing. Leyline Binding, the new one from Dominaria United, which enabled this deck to come back with a vengeance because it enables you to allow to fetch 7 drops, which are obviously very powerful in the format. And then also can exile any permanent your opponent might have, since you're already playing a 4 or 5-color mana base anyway, kind of worth splashing into. Other things, Nylea's Presence allows you to turn a land into every basic land type, which, fixes your mana as well as Chain of the Rocks. It also draws a card, so you're not really losing any value off of it. Trial of Ambition forces your opponent to sacrifice a creature. Omen of the Sea as a little bit of card selection / card draw, especially blinking with Yorion. And then, we've already kind of touched upon the 3-drop slot, 4-drop slot, and then Leyline Binding. Now it's kind of time to talk about the creatures. You have Spirited Companion, which is an enchantment and a creature, which allows you to draw a card. It's a 1/1 and is quite powerful. Renegade Rallier allows you to, in turns where you're using Enigmatic Incarnation, sacrifice one of your 2-drop enchantments, allows you to rebuy that. Knight of Autumn is just kind of a nice utility card. Allows you to destroy enchantments or artifacts, as well as gain a little bit of life. Gloom Shrieker allows you to rebuy anything you've put in the graveyard, whether it be discarding or has happened to die. Callous Blood Mage is a nice way to either draw a card or exile your opponent's library most of the time. You can also get a little bit of a board presence going. Aether Channeler, much the same way, balances a problematic opponent's permanent, draws a card, or puts a 1/1 bird token into play. Skyclave Apparition is a nice removal spell for a lot of problematic things in the format. Moon Blessed Cleric is kind of your tutor, allows you to go find your Enigmatic Incarnations, etc., whatever enchantments you might be looking for. Archon of Emeria is a nice way to deal with decks like Lotus Field, or keeping decks like Mono Green in check a little bit from casting a bunch of spells. Obviously, it's a little bit awkward with your Fires of Invention, but if you're slowing your opponent down, it might be worth it. Sarah Paragon is a nice way to rebuy all of your 2 and 3 mana enchantments that might go to the graveyard. This can be a nice one to fetch up off of your Fable the Mirror Breaker in particular. Tulsimir is a nice way to fight problematic creatures your opponents have, like things like Greasefang or things out of mono red. Scarab God, nice way to help keep the graveyard in check in the mid to late game, as well as being this kind of value engine. Yorion in the main deck, a way to blink all these very powerful enchantments we've got going on. And then Titan of Industry is one you will see in a lot of these lists. It's just kind of the Swiss Army knife, 7 drops. Blows up enchantments or artifacts, gains you a little bit of life, can put you a board presence, can make it difficult to kill your permanents. So overall, this is kind of your key 7-drop. As far as your land bases, you're playing a 5-color mana base, you're playing a bunch of Triomes, a bunch of dual lands, and a few basics in case your opponent happens to run Field of Ruin or something. But overall, these mana bases can be a little bit tricky, and one of the biggest things about them is evaluating your opening hand, whether you can cast your spells. As far as the sideboard in this particular list, basically comes down to 2 fetchable targets, a little bit of interaction, and some nice artifact or enchantment choices. So Yusharn, pretty much here for any type of sacrifice decks. Jund and Rakdos primarily keeps your opponent from sacrificing permanents. Also makes it so Liliana's kind of a bit embarrassing. Agent of Treachery, when you're playing kind of a mid-range mirror, allows you to steal things like 5-color or Niv Reborn, Planeswalkers, any number of things, and then if you happen to be able to copy it with Glassball Mimic, kind of goes nuts. Coma, this is primarily here for the control decks. It can be very difficult for them to deal with. Kimball, very good against any type of problematic spellcasting deck. So, mono red, is it the various decks, is it Lotus Field combo, etc. Can be also decent against control. Archon of Sun's Grace, quite a nice card. This is a 3/4 lifelinker that starts making 2/2 Pegasi whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control. Quite good against other aggressive decks like mono white, mono red. Okay against mono blue, but not the best. Temporary Lockdown is kind of an enchantment removal spell for your opponent's stuff. Keeping in mind this is a symmetrical effect, so it does exile things on your side of the board as well. Late Spellbinder when you need a little bit more disruption for what your opponent's doing as far as what's going on in their hand. Rest in Peace, primarily here for Izzet and Greasefang decks. And Portable Hole when you need a little bit more removal against your opponent's aggression. Disdainful Stroke, primarily here for big mana such as Mono Green, or against things like Blue-White Control or other Enigmatic Fires decks. Alright, taking a look at this second version of the deck, you're going to see a lot of the same cards, although the targets you might see in some of these. Corsair Crewfix is a little bit of an interesting one. This allows you to hit additional land drops while gaining a little bit of life. Deputy of Detention is another removal spell for various permanents, though keep in mind it is a little bit fragile, so whatever you exile could possibly come back. And then Siege Rhino, a little bit of way to stabilize against aggressive decks. Quite nice, getting a little bit of life buffer, also a nice blinking target. Kenrith, the Returned King, is quite a nice utility card, especially when you have access to black mana to return creatures from your graveyard into the battlefield. Keeping in mind that you cannot really target your opponent's stuff because it will return to the battlefield under their control. But, giving your creatures haste is quite nice, throwing +1/+1 counters, getting a little bit of life, a little bit of card advantage, things to do with your Fires Dimension, always nice. The bomb targets here, Dragonlord Tarka is quite a nice one against other creature decks. It's an 8/8 creature that threatens to end the game quite quickly, while dealing 5 damage to divide it among creatures or planeswalkers your opponents control. Sideboard, once again, you're going to see a little bit of different bullets, a little bit of different interaction. Resolute Archangel, quite nice against the various aggressive decks. Whenever it's the battlefield, your starting life becomes your original life total, so reset your life, especially against mono red. 4 copies of Mystical Dispute, pretty good against the various control and Izzet-based decks to disrupt them a little bit. This can also help fight through your Fires and Dimensions and stuff. Keeping in mind, you cannot counterspell when you have Fires and Dimension in your hand during your opponent's turn, so you want to use this more defensively to resolve your own spells. Radiant Flames is an interesting sweeper. You could certainly run things like Radiant Flames, Deafening Clarion, etc. Rending Volley, I guess this version is kind of choosing to fight the Greasefang deck on the removal spell axis more than the graveyard base axis. And then Nimble Larcenist, this enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand, and you choose an artifact, instant, or sorcery. This is okay in some spots, although I don't know that this is the best discard outlet. It's not like a Kitesail Freebooter or anything. You can't just take any card. The plus side is the card's gone permanently, so I guess you could bring this in against something like Greasefang or Control, but the fact that it only hits instants or sorceries and artifacts, a little bit of a downside over some of the other options you might see in some of the other formats for your anti-control or anti-combo-ish card out of the sideboard. Final variant we're going to take a look at. Now, keeping in mind, with a deck like this with so many tutors and tutor targets, there is no right or wrong way to build the deck in terms of what your bullets are, but just figure we'd give you some variety of what some people have seen. Anointed Peacekeeper is an interesting one. Looks at you then choose any card. Spells your opponent's cast with a chosen name cost 2 more to cast, and the activate abilities of the said card cost 2 more to activate unless they're mana abilities. Quite a nice another disruption card. Take a look at your opponent's hand. Almost elite Spellbinder it, except for you get to name every copy of the card rather than just exiling one of the card. The downside is if this dies, obviously they get that card back for its normal cost. Glassable Mimic, I'm not really sure I covered this during the first deck, but this allows you to kind of copy any powerful card you might have, copy your Titan of Industries, copy your Agent of Treacheries, copy any of your other things like Skyclave Apparition, Deputy Detention, etc. It's quite a nice thing, while also being potentially another land drop in some pinch situations. Zur turns all your artifact or your enchantments into threats on their own, and this card is kind of bonkers if it stays in play. You get enchantment creatures you control have Death Touch, Lifelink, and Hexproof, and then for 1 and a white, target non-aura enchantment you control becomes a creature in addition to its other types, has base power and toughness equal to its mana value. This effect does not go away if Zur goes away, and it lasts beyond end of turn. So this can turn your Leyline Bindings into 6/6 attackers out of nowhere, gaining you a little bit of life, especially if your Zur survives, and it's quite nice overall. Once again, we've already kind of covered Archon of Sun's Grace and Seraph Paragon. Karuga here instead of Yorion is quite interesting. This allows you to, obviously, for when it comes into play, any permanents you have mana value 3 or greater, you draw a card from it for each other permanent besides Karuga itself. Scarab God we've already kind of covered. As far as the sideboard, you'll see some interesting things here. You'll see some more bullets, things like Hornet Queen against various creature-based decks. Those tokens making it hard to attack through. Workshop Warchief, whenever it enters the battlefield you gain 3 life, or whenever it dies, put a 4 token into play, and also has a blitz cost. So quite nice against when you're trying to stabilize against other decks, or other creature-based decks. A couple more copies of Radiant Flames. I guess the nice part about Radiant Flames is you control how much damage it deals. So you can do Radiant Flames for 1, Radiant Flames for 2, or up to 3. And then, Rending Volley is quite nice against Greasefang, as we've already kind of covered. Treacherous Blessing, interesting one to be able to fish up with your Moonblessed Curse to draw 3 cards. Then you can sacrifice it with your copies of Incarnation to go get a 4-drop. Some mystical use to protect your Fires Inventions or Incarnations for resolving. Shark Typhoon, interesting one I guess you could side it in place of Leyline of Binding or something. You don't play a ton of non-creature spells, like obviously you play some because of all the enchantments you play, but this is also kind of a random, kind of gotcha card against control out of nowhere. All of a sudden you hit them with a 5/5 at the end of the turn they're not expecting. And Rest of Peace we've already kind of covered. Now, as far as the deck's place in the meta, there really isn't enough data to go off of. It's a deck that is starting to see a little bit more play with Leyline Binding. It's a deck that's seen some spotty play here and there. I played a little bit of it on the Arena client in, not in Pioneer, in Explorer. So most of what I'm about to say kind of comes from that experience. So the one deck in particular that I have no opinion on, or I don't have enough data on, is Mono Green. I feel like Mono Green's probably slightly favored because they have an infinite combo, but you still have a lot of interaction for what they're doing. You can play things like Disdainful Stroke in the sideboard to help improve the matchup just a tiny bit. You are 2 kind of go over the top mid-range decks trying to do what they do. Mono Green sets up a little bit faster. You don't have a ton of disruption for what they're doing. So I think Mono Green is still slightly favored, but I can see some spots where, you get like a Leyline of Binding into, sacrificing for an Agent of Treachery, copy the Agent of Treachery, really kind of pick apart what their deck is doing, or maybe Callous Blood Maging their Storm the Festival away that they flipped off a Cavalier. The big thing with them is their Planeswalkers. Their creatures you can kind of hold in check. Their Old Growth Trolls and their Cavalier of Thorns are not the most threatening except for adding their mana. The thing is really Karn and their Planeswalkers, holding them in check. Can you Leyline Binding a Karn at the right time? Or can you, Titan of Industry blow up whatever their key artifact is? Can you, Agent of Treachery steal their important Planeswalker? It's really about keeping them off of the combo, and I really think in a kind of over-the-top slug fight, it's fairly close, although I would still give the edge to Mono Green. Where this deck really shines is it really hits home on decks like, Rakdos Midrange, Rakdos Sack, The matchup against Greasefang often comes down to, do they have a fast Greasefang combo or not? When it comes to their value game, generally you can outpower their value game plans of like casting Asika's Chariots and Liliana's and all these various other things. They really have to have a fast combo. So especially in the post-board games, you want to keep a hand with early interaction, an early Rest in Peace, and an early copy of Fry or Running Volley, whatever your hate card happens to be in the particular format you're playing. So that can be a tricky matchup. Aggressive decks, you can slant a little bit more towards them. Most aggressive decks you can have a game plan for. One card I found myself running in the Explorer format was the Meathook Massacre. Was quite nice in some spots. It made things very awkward for Mono Red a little bit. It made things awkward for the Rakdos Sack decks. So I found that as a nice card against the lower to the ground aggressive decks. Now that said, Mono Blue Spirits is a nightmare. You're a clunky mid-range deck. They're a tempo deck with a bunch of counter spells and cheap creatures. That next deck's going to be a nightmare. So control, you have a lot of value stuff going on. A lot of 2-for-1s. It just depends on if they can counter your key spells. That matchup feels a little bit close, especially if you get to resolve like something like a Coma off of sacking a Leyline and Binding. Coma can be very difficult for them to deal with outside of a card like Farewell. So there's a lot of very powerful things this deck does. It dumpsters other mid-range decks. It feels like it's a slight dog to mono green. You have some like tutorable targets against that obscure decks like Lotus Field, things like Anointed Peacekeeper or Elite Spellbinder or Kimball or all these other different things. That's one of these things. This deck can be built to kind of combat everything other than maybe mono green, and has a lot of flexibility. So it can be a lot of fun to play. So if you're looking for something a little bit off the beaten path, that's kind of gaining notoriety, it's a deck that's kind of more of a known quantity, but you can just add your own little spice to the deck. This deck is certainly the deck for you. And obviously Yorion, rebuying that as a companion. It's already been banned in Modern, so it's quite a powerful card. This deck is tricky to play. It's a lot of fun to learn, and I will be linking the videos of the gameplay on the Explorer format from my other channel, but I want you to be aware this is a deck that really there isn't a ton of stuff out there for, although there is more and more information about it, more gameplay coming out. So, as always, I want to thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to vote on that poll about whether you'd like to see a little bit of gameplay for the Pioneer format come to the channel again as well. As always, this has been John for Pioneer Nexus MTG.